You're watching Capital City Sunday.
Good morning. This week on Capital City Sunday, looking ahead after Tuesday's spring election, what the presidential primary results tell us about November.
The parties can still influence how those new voters or additional voters see the candidates and see their campaigns and the issues.
Marquette Law School poll director Charles Franklin sits down with political reporter Darielle Fair. His takeaways for the presidential primary, plus MU's new national poll out this week, how it compares to the primary results.
We are all, public servants trying to do the best that we can to ensure people have a voice in the process that they are eligible to.
And clerks weigh in on changes to how elections are run in Wisconsin after voters approved 2 new constitutional amendments.
It's a question about funding and whether or not we value funding them and what our commitment is to education.
And school referendum. State Superintendent Jill Underly takes aim at state lawmakers, accusing them of underfunding schools as more and more districts ask voters for tax increases. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Massler-Donar. Voters made their voices heard Tuesday in Wisconsin's spring primary election. They weighed in on local leaders, presidential candidates, referendums, and 2 proposed constitutional amendments. A majority of Wisconsinites on Tuesday voted in favor of adopting those amendments. As a result, the use of private money to fund elections is banned, and only election officials can administer elections. Now, that election official piece is already in state law, but putting it in the Constitution makes it more difficult to repeal or change. Now, the amendments were put on the ballot by the Republican-controlled legislature in reaction to grant money that went to dozens of Wisconsin communities in 2020, grants that were funded by Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg. Now, most of the money went to the state's 5 largest cities, all of which President Joe Biden won, and Republicans complained it was an attempt to tip the vote in favor of Democrats. 3 courts and the bipartisan Wisconsin Elections Commission since then have rejected complaints challenging the legality of the grant money. While more than 85% of the grant money did go to the state's 5 biggest cities, roughly 200 communities were included in the funding, like the city of Wausau. We're joined now by Wausau's municipal clerk, Kaitlyn Bernarde. Kaitlyn, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So to start off with, Kaitlyn, how often is Wausau utilizing private funding to administer elections?
Fortunately, we don't have to rely on private funding regularly, but like you said, we did receive grant funds in 2020, which helped us in that unique situation.
There have been some concerns from other clerks that a ban on private funding would hurt Wisconsin's smaller municipalities. Obviously, this ban is now a reality. Do you share a concern for Wausau and its budget?
Yeah, in Wisconsin, all local municipalities are in charge of administering elections. So that means we have to cover the costs for ballots, our equipment, paying and training our poll workers, just to name a few items. And so if we have a unique situation like the 2020 COVID pandemic where drastically in a short amount of time we have to pay for a lot more postage or a lot more envelopes for absentee ballots, that can be a great strain on our local budgets. And there's a bottom line somewhere where by state law we're required to put postage on absentee envelopes, but that money might not be there. So communities that are like size of Wausau or much smaller townships around the area, it could be a lot harder for them to execute those duties that are required by state law that we carry out.
So at this point, how is Wausau preparing to address a potential funding gap in future elections, should, as you say, one of those emergency situations such as the pandemic occur again?
Yeah, so we have conversations with myself, our finance director, our mayor, as well as with other clerks about kind of contingency planning. Like, how can we cushion or be prepared for potential outcomes that might require us to need additional funds. And luckily last year we did get publicly funded grant monies to help offset the implementation of our new absentee envelopes, which was greatly appreciated, but it did not cover the full cost. So a lot of clerks, Wausau included, we had a stock of absentee envelopes left over that the state told us we could not use anymore, and we had to purchase brand new envelopes for 2024 that we had to use. And so those monies need to come somewhere. And so we had lots of conversations while we were doing the budgeting process for 2024 to make sure that we could cover those costs, as well as, make the best possible guess on, what those monies would be needed, not knowing, potential threats or situations that this busy year might bring us.
Let's move on to that second constitutional amendment now, which voters also approved. Only election officials can administer elections. Now, it's already in state law, so Kaitlyn, is there going to be much of a change there for you?
It's unclear, and that was one of the biggest concerns by myself and other clerks that I've talked to about this, is that question, that referendum question that now passed, was very vague on, what is the actual, or what duties fall under that election administration, who are election officials. Here in the city of Wausau, we have amazing Department of Public Works staff that they work closely with myself in our office to get all of our supplies to the poll sites, work with the poll sites, bring everything back. But they are technically not election officials. And so I've been working with our county clerk and talking with other clerks about, now that this is implemented, what steps do we have to do to ensure that they would qualify as election officials. But with that passage, it leaves open the room for interpretation on who election officials are and what specific election duties are.
So you say that, you are talking with the county clerk about plans, but moving forward, are you concerned that the new requirement might dissuade volunteers with, as you say, the language being a bit vague here? Maybe volunteers might not want to dedicate their time if they're not sure if they'd be allowed?
Yeah, I think it also, it puts more pressure on people, higher scrutiny, and that also, I think some people, the public, think that gives more opportunity to intimidate or vocalize frustration with volunteers. When you're called an election official, people can be very vocal, even though people can be the best intentioned and follow the Wisconsin law as much as possible. I have heard comments from other poll workers about, like, that's their biggest concern, and one election having a bad experience could make them not want to help out again.
Last question here for you, Kaitlyn. Moving ahead here in election season, what do voters need to know about how your office will be implementing and planning for these two new constitutional amendments?
Yeah, we'll be working with our county clerk, our neighboring clerks, and the Wisconsin Elections Commission to make sure that we implement these two referendums as much as possible, to follow the law, as well as kind of work collaboratively to ensure that we can still run, safe, secure elections with the funds that we have available, as well as continuing to advocate for funds to be available from, whether it's our county, our state, or our federal partners, to carry out these elections. And for the second question, ensuring that we do as much as we can to ensure that, again, we're following that law properly and thinking through collaboratively, who would be, considered an election official, or those election procedures, procedures, so that way, everyone, still has trust and faith in the system, that, we are all, public servants trying to do the best that we can to ensure people have a voice in the process that they are eligible to. And, we, no matter, if you have a small population or a large population, it takes a lot of people and a lot of steps to carry out an election, whether it's, a small local primary to the general election, presidential election in November. It takes a lot of people, a lot of steps, and a lot of funds to make that happen. And I know that clerks all across Wisconsin will work together to ensure that happens in 2024.
Wausau City Clerk Kaitlyn Bernarde, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us this morning.
Thank you.
A number of districts asked their voters to approve more money for schools. and the voters said no. We'll talk with the state superintendent about why districts have to keep turning to this option and what they can try next if their referendums failed.